What I mean by that is they start with details about that character, right? Hair color, eye color, what they look like, their clothing, and then they might get on to like personality and stuff like that. And only at the end of that process do they really grapple with the essential part of what makes a character human. They grapple with questions like, what does this character believe about others? Like, what?
These are all good questions to ask. What does this character believe about others? Man, I usually forget to consider what a character looks like. Yeah, Levi, like, half the time, I don't give a shit what the character looks like. I'm like, I need to know their species, but beyond knowing their species, like, you really don't, unless it comes up, like, there's a specific eye color, there's a specific scar, there's a marking, like, only if it's relevant in some ways, right? Oh, he's a warrior? Yeah, that's all I need to imagine them. Yeah, because then you build the character, and then it allows you to build the character in your mind. That's why sometimes, like, I don't like seeing, like, the illustrations of the author, because it ruins my image of what I imagine it is. And when I see what the author actually imagined, I go, okay, yeah, I could see that, but that doesn't line up with what I see it as, and then that becomes a clash. So I think actually just not having any illustrations, other than, like, the basic concept, like, for instance, having these, right? Like, we need to have, like, especially for such weird creatures, right? So it's like, what do insectoids actually look like? What do avians actually look like, right? Well, it's like a pelican with a snake tail. So imagine like a bird with a snake tail. And insectoids are like, imagine what would happen if you centaurified a ladybug. And then the octopi are like, you know, just normal octopi, but their legs are like molded together, right? So it's like, it's a basic idea, but you don't really get the full illustration of it.
What does this character believe about God or the world or...
What does the character believe about others, God, world?
Their purpose for
purpose. So this is the kind of, I wish he had just had the list so we could just go through it, right?
existence, like, you know, big picture type of stuff. I'm going to argue that that process that pretty much all writers use is...
Really, it's what does the character believe about theme. I guess that's a good way to put it, Levi.
Is the wrong way of building a character. It's completely backwards. Because I think when you start with details and then you go towards core beliefs, a lot of the time you don't reach all the way to core beliefs, or like the core beliefs end up being sort of fuzzy. And so what you end up with is you end up with a very hollow character, a character that does not feel real. I believe you should construct characters in a completely different way. You should start with their core belief, like a very small phrase that establishes something central about what they believe as a character.
True.
And then you go from there to lead to all the details about their life. Now, a core belief can be something like people always leave, or don't trust people in power. And then once you discover that core belief of your character, you take it and you use it to determine their choices and their behavior and their appearance and everything else. So here's an example. Say you have a character whose core belief is you must be perfect to be loved. It's relatable. I feel like it's very common. But if we take that core belief, I think we can spin off from there what this character is going to look like. That core belief gives you an indication or a hint of what their appearance might be like. Say they dress immaculate.
Yeah, like what kind of things inform physiognomy? That's like your inner visual, right, Levi? Thank you for everything you gave me inspiration again. With all your advice, I'm leaving you. all your advices, I'm leaving you. I'm going to write, like, right now. Thank you so much again, and can't wait to see you for your next live. True! Thanks, Janela. Welcome, welcome, and have a good night. Enjoy your writing. I stream every day, so always feel free to come back. We will be here. We have not missed a day in almost 5 months now. Funny description I once read was, he said, raising his fist high like Rudolph Kleinrock in Metropolis, with whom he shared an undeniable resemblance. Physiognomy is the way that people's appearances reflect who they are as people. Ah, okay. Makes sense. You too, thank you so much. A activated the notif. Alright, sounds good, Janela. Have a good night. Thank you, thank you. Always appreciate someone, the compliments. I'm glad we helped you out. And I'm glad you enjoyed the stream.
Immaculately because they believe they have to be perfect in order to be loved. That belief will manifest itself in the speech patterns as well. This is likely to be a character who speaks very carefully and very measuredly because they're afraid of saying something wrong, because if they say something imperfect, then people won't love them. This belief manifests
like Roald Dahl's, the twits are ugly people explicitly because they've got ugly personalities. Ah.
in their personality. They're probably more risk adverse, right? Because they're frightened of what might happen. They might also be compulsively organized, have a very neat existence. This kind of belief can also give you clues about the character's backstory. Let's say they had parents who were highly critical of every single thing that they did, and that's how they became this way. And lastly, a core belief like this helps you figure out, what is this character's relationships going to be like? Well, maybe they have difficulty accepting praise because they don't believe they are perfect enough. Now, if you're thinking of a character of yours right now and you're like, I don't know what their core belief is, let me give you a few more examples of core beliefs that hopefully should spark some imaginative juices. Power is the only way to ensure safety. Love always leads to betrayal. Family loyalty comes before all else. Now, hopefully that...
Okay, let's go back. So, I just had an idea here. So, like, putting pretty much all of these things together, so is this a good idea for a TikTok? Just having these things on the... Just straight up... No fucks given, word for word, frickin', like, the Dursleys are hideous in the Harry Potter series. It's like saving yourself the trouble of describing him by saying, he came in dressed in a suit like Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction, with whom he shared an undeniable resemblance. Like, yeah, he looks like Brad Pitt. And Sean, I think that's because their entire, like... I don't know how to say it, like... I don't know. Good morning, Eddie. How's it going? How are you? Okay, so we got power is the only way to ensure safety. So, like, basically just this individual slide I could turn into a TikTok. And that's, like, good enough. I don't need to take the entirety of this video and turn it into, like, a 2-minute TikTok. I can take each individual piece and slice and turn it into something of its own. Is that more, like, closer to what I should be going for? Like, something as simple as, build your characters from these, I don't know what to call them. Personality?
Now,
Or
hopefully
like, ideals. Ideals.
that helps you with some ideas. But if none of those work for your character, I have a process that I take authors through that helps them discover what the core belief of the character is. Because trust me, I know, like, it's hard to just come up with like a core problem out of the blue. You're just like, I don't know how to do that. So hold on, let me take you through this process. I'm going to help you find your character's core beliefs by asking you to come up with their unspoken rule. So every character needs at least one arbitrary rule that they absolutely refuse to break. And I think if you can come up with what that unspoken rule is, it's often something that leads you to their core belief. Now, a little word of caution here. I don't think you want a really obvious unspoken rule, something like, I don't kill people. Well, unless you're in the military, like, I think that's sort of taken for granted, right? Like, most characters aren't being like, my rule is to murder people. Unless you're writing a character like Dexter, right? I mean, there are exceptions. In Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro, Stevens the butler has this unspoken rule about he never presents his own opinions to others. He never deflects, he never speaks up, and this is even when his employer is entertaining literal Nazis. Like, Nazis are at his dining table, and he doesn't speak up and tell his employer, like, you sure about that? But that unspoken rule of not revealing his personal opinions tells us something very important about his core belief. He believes he's not worthy to speak up. He believes his opinions don't matter. He believes that genteel society and politeness and maintaining his job as a butler is more important than confronting someone who's in league with the Nazis. In many ways, this is the perfect attitude for a butler, so self-effacing, so willing to be invisible to sort of help someone else fulfill their goals. So the question is, what is your character's one unspoken rule? The one rule they really will refuse to break, even if there are really good reasons to break it. And once you come up with that rule, then you can come up with, okay, if they won't break that rule, what does that say about their core belief? What do they really believe about the world? Once you have a core belief of your character,
I'd say, let's see, Husai's core belief and his unspoken rule. It's like, it boils down to the fact that he knows that he's human. It's like, his unspoken rule is that he's not special, despite the fact that he is extremely special. He just refuses to acknowledge that he is the only one that, like, has fate in its hands. Which is kind of, like, true, because there's the Warriors of Light, who are the power to facilitate the need that Husai has. Refuses to be arrogant. Very true, Sean. That's a good one. Varius, that's easy. Varius refuses to conform. He will always come up with new ideas. If you copy him, he will ditch those ideas and create new ones. And that's how he inspires trends. Through, like that's basically why he's the Shakespeare of the time, right? Because he's always creating new ways of doing things and evoking, like, the, inner message that people are looking for, right? He just knows how to speak to people. It's just kind of one of his things. Whereas, like, gluttony. Gluttony's unspoken rule. Gluttony's a little bit more difficult. He's... Because on the one hand, I want to say he's earned his place to be the disgusting, revolting, fat ass that he is. And it's his personality and the fact that he's a paladin. He's desperate to be individual and to be noticed, but by being noticed, he gets copied and thus loses his individuality. Yeah, Sean, that's a very, very good way of putting it. and that's why he's always striving for something new. And reason why he followed Husai into the tree to basically, you know, he's like the I guess he'd be like the modern day combination of Quentin Tarantino, Peter Jackson, James Cameron, and who's the other really big one? Like the Pied Piper leading the rats away. Yeah. Is Peter Jackson that interesting as a person? No. I mean, we're talking like their influence on like today's entertainment. Like Peter Jackson as a director, his influence on cinema over the last 30, 40 years, right? Like he's had a huge influence on it. And if you look at like experimental, like out of the way, not conforming to anything, Quentin Tarantino. He just fucking does his own thing, and he does it in his own way, and he has his own structure, and he just fucking follows that. James Cameron just goes above and beyond and pushes the limits of technology and acting and story writing to like phenomenal levels. So maybe just those pretty much those three. No, there's another one I'm thinking of, but I can't remember the name. Oh, Christopher Nolan. My favorite director? I mean, would you... I mean, I would say Quentin Tarantino. He directs, right? Or does he just write? Yeah, he's also a director. Probably Taika, but I'm not a movies guy. That's just movies. Like, I don't and I'm only saying that because those are the only names I know. Like, whoever directed I'd say probably Akira. Like, if we're talking anime, like Katsuhiro Omoto. Or Otomo. Don't know what else he did, but like, wasn't Taika Waititi making the In-Call movie? Pied Piper was a Scotsman sent to gather troops for the war. At the time, you were referred to as a child of whatever town because you didn't have a family name unless you were a noble. Ah. I see.
You need to do some work to make it a contradictory core belief. In other words, you need to find a situation where your character's core belief is running up against a situation that gives them all the reason in the world to break that core belief. And that's because core beliefs, they're really not dramatic until they...
Yeah, and that's kind of like Husai. He's being put at the forefront of all of this, but he doesn't want to believe that he's the leader. He doesn't want to believe that he's the chosen one. And he has to come face to face with that, even in the end, when he's like, you know, it's like he throws that unbreakable rule away at the end of the second book, when, like, at the end of the series, when he tells Gaia to destroy his consciousness and use him as a vessel. It's the first time he accepts that his body... He goes as far as to accept that his body is the vessel needed by Gaia. But he he doesn't think that his mind is what's needed. He just believes his body as a physical vessel is needed. He doesn't believe his mind is needed, but Gaia needs to change his mind on that. Taika made Hunt for the Winter Wilder people and What We Do in the Shadows. Those two are really big. Jojo Rabbit too. You guys are going way beyond me. Never even heard of any of those.
Come into
I'm not really a film connoisseur unless they're like really old, obscure, random films.
tension with something else. Let's say you have a character whose core belief is money doesn't buy happiness. That's not very interesting until you reveal that they are a workaholic and spending way too much time at work. Or look at an example like Don Draper from Mad Men. On one hand, he preaches all the time about authenticity and advertising. He turns down clients if he doesn't think they're the right fit. He tries to be honest and straightforward with clients. But then on the other hand, in his personal life, he is a master of deception. He keeps so many secrets. He cheats on his wife. So his core belief about honesty
John Hamm is fucking amazing.
Is at odds with how he lives his personal life. Another choice is to have your character's core belief challenged by a deep desire. Look at Shiv Roy from the series Succession. Here is a woman who has such a core belief about her independence and capability to run this massive organization without anyone else's help. And yet she so desperately wants her father's validation and approval. That is an excellent contradiction between her core beliefs and what she really wants. Okay, so you used an unspoken rule to come up with your character's core belief. You also made that belief contradictory in some way, gave it a little bit more attention. The next step is to use that core belief to figure out several things about your character. Specifically, we're gonna focus on three things: backstory, actions, and personality. Let's start by using that core belief to create your character's backstory. Let's start with a fun example: Bruce Wayne and Batman, right? Let's say his core belief is that chaos and crime can be controlled through strength and fear. So the question is, what is an event in his backstory that could lead him to a belief like that? Well, as you probably know, witnessing his parents' murder in what comes to be known as Crime Alley is the perfect recipe to make him believe a core belief like that. Let's look at another example by Thomas Harris. His most famous book is Silence of the Lambs, and you know his character, Hannibal Lecter. I would say that his core belief is the powerful prey on the weak, so become the predator. So if that is his core belief, what is the backstory that would lead him to that belief? Well, it's got to be some sort of
get into Crime Alley, get crimed. True, Levi.
sense of powerlessness, all right, of being hunted by others. And we do see that in his backstory. During World War II, his sister Misha was both killed and eaten by starving Nazi soldiers. That is the origin story of his cannibalism. That is the origin story of his feeling of helplessness and yet wanting to master that helplessness by becoming a predator. Now, I know the examples I'm giving of backstory are very much like one-to-one correlations, and it's very easy to see the connection. I don't think it has to be that way. I think your backstories can be a lot more complex and nuanced. It's difficult to give examples of those types of things, but I think it's important for you to know that you have a lot of different options with backstory. It doesn't have to be a precise example of trauma that leads to your character believing a core belief. But now let's move on to
the reason why Husai believes the thing that he does is because he knows that he sees himself as human and no one else is human, and he's the only human, and he's like, well, this, you know, that's like the conflict of the inner desire is he knows that he sees himself as something else. He knows that illusion magic is possible because other people see him as an octopi, but he's not an octopi. He doesn't know anybody else that looks like him. He's like, what the fuck? And it's like, it's emphasized by the fact that he is, like, significantly bigger than all of the other octopi. Like, they stand, like, tallest as, like, 5'8". He's like 6'6", 6'7". Like he's fucking massive for an octopi. And that's kind of how I wanted to show it on the cover. Is even though Gluttony is fucking massive and he's like a basilisk, like he's literally like a full like 3-foot circumference. Like his snake tail is like this fucking wide. Like, he weighs, like, fucking, like, 400 pounds. He's fucking ginormous, and he still can barely like wrap around Husai. Because Husai is so fucking big that he even dwarfs the look of Gluttony. But when you look at other avians, they're like a sixth the size of Gluttony.
Another stage of using your core beliefs to create your character's actions. Because belief by itself is undramatic, right? You don't get...
Bilbo has a core belief centered around being very polite and proper. True. And it's like, even among... Because, like, it's almost like, you could say that, like, he thinks... Or I guess a better way to say it is, because of that, other people think that Bilbo's stuck up. Like, other hobbits and stuff like that. Like, the lower class hobbits, for instance, you know? The ones he kind of scoffs at. It's like, they think he's, like, a stuck-up, you know? But he's just trying to be, like, polite and proper and in his place, and, you know, it's all about presentation, right? And that's why it contrasts with, like, him being a hobbit, where you would think that, you know, you wouldn't have that kind of mentality, which is very interesting. And the fact that he's, like, not quite like other hobbits either, right? He has that adventurous spirit that always seems to elude them. There's more of a migratory need, I'd say, in any essence.
To a story through a belief. But I think belief is often the driving force that determines what your characters do in your book. So in Cormac...
It's all about acting right, but in a way that's very manner-centered.
McCarthy's The Road, you could characterize the father's core belief as protecting innocence is the only moral duty we have left. Okay, so how does that manifest itself in an apocalyptic wasteland? 1, he goes without food so he can give more to his son. 2, he tries to keep secrets from his son, including not telling him that, you know, he's coughing up blood and that it's very likely he's going to die very soon. And 3, he is willing to kill others in order...
But he has to go against those manners when he steals the Arkenstone, which goes against his manners. Yeah, and that's why he doesn't like people calling him a burglar. Because he's like, burglars are like there's a specific line that he says, right? Referring to burglars. And the reason, like, they're like, you know, a certain set of people, right? So it's like being referred to in that way is like insulting to him.
To protect the innocence of his son. If you as an author can identify the core belief of your character, you can map out what needs to happen in your book, what actions your character needs to take to make sense of them as a person. If the father did not do all those things to protect the innocence of his son, he would not be as memorable of a character as he really...
Well, it's kind of like with Zaid, where Husai's downfall is that he's trying to protect Zaid, and at the end of the day, that winds up getting Zaid killed because he wouldn't allow Zaid to come on the trip. And he's instilled in Zaid this continuous need to be recognized. And he's like, hey, if I save the Adventurers Guild and fend off everyone like I know I can, I'll be completely fine and Husai will come back and he'll, like, actually respect me. And then the Monarch just comes up and fucking kills him. Well, it technically doesn't kill him. He stabs him in the heart, which basically causes him to be paralyzed. And then the rest of the people come up and, you know, do whatever they do. And then eventually he gets, like, crucified to the doors and decapitated. And I kind of want something like the idea of, like, his hand is, like, you know, kind of sideways like this, like, nailed in sideways like this. And, like... his fingers are, like, nailed down like this with the tufts of his hair, and he's literally, like, holding his head in his hand as he's, like, stuck to the door. And it's, like, the entirety of the building up to it is... Well, it's like he's... Raymond, the thing is, inside of the tree, you can't die. Like, the only way you can die inside of the tree is having your head cut off. You can literally rip your heart out of your chest, and your heart would regenerate. Like, you can't die inside of the tree. Unless your head's cut off. Because it can't regenerate your brain. But it can regenerate everything else. I don't know why, that's just the logic of it. It's because of consciousness. Once consciousness leaves your body, and consciousness is in the brain. So once the brain leaves, then the body, decays away. But, yeah, that's the reason why you can't die. And that's the reason why the entirety of leading up to it, Husai's like, no, people can't die inside of the tree. There's no way. You'll be fine. And then it's like it's just describing the blood streak. And it's like, I got this from when I was in film. My teacher, he was like an older dude. He was probably he was like 65 when I was like 14. He told us of this story in his hometown where this guy was a drunk driver, and everyone knew that he was a drunk driver, and everyone just kind of let him do it. And one day he hit a guy and dragged the guy's body underneath his car across the entire town. And there was just this blood streak throughout the entire town. And that's kind of how I imagine this, is Zaid being dragged through, the corridors leading up to the Adventurers Guild because of how far he pushed people back. And it's just this endless stain of blood dragged across the ground, just continuously inferring how horrible a scene you're gonna see. And then you see him crucified to the fucking door holding his own head in his hand. It's just fucking beautiful, in my opinion. And then that's what breaks Husai, is the final seeing it. And then it goes into the fervor of he said to me I needed to find this. I'm going to look through his work. I'm going to find what he was talking about. And, of course, he eventually finds the Warriors of Light. So it's like, without Zaid's death, he never would have looked into it. He never would have considered it. Zaid had to die in order for Husai to find this information. And that's how it started. And then we worked in the Monarch, and now it's like all of Zaid's death ties 8 different plot lines all together nice and neatly without any, any other random things, or nothing random comes in to grab it. It just goes, everything's fine.
Is. I'll also add in this section that you can come up with actions that go against the core belief. For instance, maybe your character has a very strong core belief about the sanctity of life, but they find themselves in a scenario with maybe someone who's very old, and euthanasia starts to become an option to them because they're in so much pain. The tension between the core belief and what seems to be the right option is going to do wonders for your book. The next step is to use your character's core belief in order to establish your character's personality. And by personality, I'm just talking about the temperament and how your character interacts with other people. For an example, let's look at Harry Potter and Hermione Granger. So one of her core values, and this isn't her only core value, but I'd say it's one of the stronger ones, is academic excellence and the pursuit of knowledge. So if that's her core belief, how does that manifest itself in her personality? Well, she can be very intense. She approaches everything with this dedication and focus. She tends to be a perfectionist as well and sets these very high standards not only for herself, but for others too. That sort of belief makes her very methodical, right? She's a planner. She's not someone who just flies by the seat of her pants. And lastly, she becomes a little bit domineering, right? She's a little bit of a know-it-all and can be kind of bossy. Okay, so now we're getting to the very last stage of this inverted character building process. You know the core belief of your character, you know something contradictory about that belief, you know their personality and actions and personality. Now, and only now, now can we actually drill down and get to the details. This is what most authors start with when they're creating a character, but in our process, it's going to be very last. So here are 3 details you should figure out about your character at this point. 1, a mannerism. 2, give your character a speech pattern. And 3, give your character an appearance. So let's start by giving your character a mannerism. Now, the trouble with most character mannerisms is that they don't reveal anything about the character. They're just this anonymous action that virtually anyone could take in the world, and it would mean the exact same thing. For example, running one's hand through one's hair in frustration. You see this gesture all the time in books, and it doesn't tell you anything about the character. It's zero.
If you've read Sword of Truth, you'll know this one, because this ties, this is a great example. This ties extremely well into the narrative. Richard always runs his hand through his hair when he's frustrated. It's basically like set up through the entirety of the book. And then when you get to the end of the book, when Darken Rahl, spoilers if anyone cares, spoilers for Sword of Truth, spoilers, when Richard finally gets to like confronting Darken Rahl for the first time, basically Darken Rahl puts a spell on him that makes it so all of Richard's enemies will see him as Richard, and all of Richard's friends will see him as Darken Rahl. And his grandfather and his future wife are basically standing there, looking at Darken Rahl, wondering why the fuck he's here. And Zed, the grandfather, is like, there is something wrong with this scene. I know that something is wrong. And, Kaylin, the other character, she's a confessor. Now, one of the big things they've set up is that Kaylin will use her confessor magic on Richard to control him. And they're all like, there's no fucking way that would ever happen! But Darken Rahl made Richard look like Darken Rahl, and now Darken Rahl is in front of Kaylin. So Zed's sitting there like, wait, something's wrong here, because Richard is, it's like with his frustrated look on his face, he's like running his hand through his hair, which is not so, and Darken Rahl is like a very, like he has a burn all over his body and stuff like that, so like he would never run his hand through his hair like that. Like there's just mannerisms that he would never do that are specific to Richard, and Zed's like, wait, right before Kaylin touches him and uses her powers on him. And it's like, this whole setup and everything like that, and it's all, as the reader, you're like trying to tell Zed, like, look for these things! Notice this, please! Stop her! No! What's going on? You know? And it's like just building this drive for the reader. And it all stems off of, can you notice these small mannerisms of the characters? So, I thought that was a great example of that.
Zero character building. It is an anonymous action that anyone could take. Your goal is to create a mannerism that reflects the deeper values and core belief systems of your character. So let's look at an example from Gillian Flynn, her book Sharp Objects. And we're going to look at this amazing mannerism the mother has. My mother hushed me, looking away. When my mother is piqued, she has a peculiar tell. She pulls at her eyelashes. Sometimes they come out. This is a mannerism that is uniquely suited to this character. The eyelash pulling shows her as believing that bodies are something that need to be controlled, and that bodies are something that need to be disciplined rather than accepted. Also, eyelash pulling is like a very gentle metaphor for the type of self-harm that goes on in this novel, and there's a lot, including the daughter's cutting. And the way she treats her own body through things like eyelash pulling mirrors the way that she treats her daughter's bodies as well. It's a mannerism which perfectly matches who she is as a character. Now, I've actually written a whole blog post more about mannerisms, so if you're stuck on mannerisms, you want some more ideas for fodder, and you don't know what your character could possibly do, I'll put a link in the description to that mannerism post so you can read it and be inspired. The second thing we're going to use your character's core belief to figure out is give your character a speech pattern. So Andy Weir is a fantastic sci-fi writer. You probably know him from stuff like Hail Mary, but he also wrote The Martian, which became a movie with Matt Damon. And Matt Damon plays a character called Mart Watney, who I think his core belief could be summarized as science and rationality can solve seemingly impossible problems. Now, if that was his only core belief, I think the way he would speak would be very boring in the book, to be honest. We'd get a whole bunch of scientific jargon and like 1/20th of the people reading would actually understand it. But that's not his only core belief, right? There's also a contradictory core belief that he thinks that if he's going to survive, humor is going to be just as important as science and rationality. So how does that core belief and the contradictory core belief manifest in a speech? Well, it's this strange mix of both science and humor. On one hand, you have like straight up science passages like this one. All right, so I need to create a closed loop oxygen system. That means I'll have to use the Martian atmosphere, which is mostly CO2, and somehow convert it to breathable oxygen. The best way to do that is through electrolysis. But then he also has lines which are definitely tongue-in-cheek. Luckily, in the history of humanity, nothing bad has ever happened from lighting hydrogen on fire. Oh, the Hindenburg called, it wants its explosion back. He also does this great thing where he mixes low diction, which is humor, right, with high diction, the science part of things. I tested the brackets by hitting them with rocks. That's the low diction part, right? Here comes the high diction part. This kind of sophistication is what we interplanetary scientists are known for. And then sometimes he mixes up his scientific jargon with sort of like lowbrow language as well.
I'm gonna have to science the out of this.
If you can use your character's core belief to figure out some sort of nuance or interesting contradiction about the way that they speak, your book's gonna be brilliant. And lastly, we come to the place where most people actually start, right? The character's appearance. But we're ending here for a very specific purpose, because I think once you know all this other stuff about this character, their core beliefs, their backstory, their personality, how they speak, then and only then are you ready to figure out what they look like. Now, obviously, there are some aspects of your character's appearance that don't really depend on stuff like backstory or core beliefs, right? Hair color, eye color, like, no. You can just choose those. But there are some aspects of your character's core belief that do affect a good deal about their appearance. Look at Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games. She has a core belief that practical survival trumps social niceties. So that sort of thing is reflected in her appearance. She has a very practical braid, which is good when you're running around and people are trying to kill you. She has very utilitarian clothing, right? This isn't like fanciness like all those people in the Capitol. Or look at a character like Miss Havisham from Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. She has this core belief that heartbreak stops time. So when she gets jilted at the altar, she spends the rest of her days in that wedding dress, letting it get more and more tattered, letting it yellow. Her appearance is frozen in time, kind of like her emotional state. Or look at Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho, in which you have a character like Patrick Bateman. He fundamentally believes that control and power and wealth are the most important things in life. And so he thinks that aging and physical decay end up being signs of weakness. What that means is he develops this insane skincare ritual, and that he meticulously styles his hair, and that his clothing is organized by color, and his perfectly manicured nails are checked compulsively. His appearance is how he manifests power in the world. And it also matches his compulsive personality and his very shallow superficiality. Okay, I hope that was helpful, me walking you through this process of inverted character creation, and check out one of my other videos on character creation if you need some more help.